zoning committee, and then we have a draft ordinance and a memorandum. So let me ask if there's any discussion, motions, requests for changes in the draft ordinance, and so on and so forth.
This was strictly on payday loans, right?
Right.
Okay. One of the questions that was brought up last time is just how many we have existing. Do we?
Best estimate that we can make, if you look at the 3 maps that are included in your packet, there are currently 3 establishments in the city that definitely meet the proposed definition, as well as one that is currently in the permit process. There are other establishments that may or may not meet the definition. It's hard to tell unless they're applying for a zoning analysis. So at this time, we would say there's 3, possibly soon to be 4.
There are tax preparers in the city that will prepare your tax and then discount your tax rebate instantly. Which, is that any different than what we're looking at in payday loans?
That would be fairly different. If you look at the proposed definition, they're talking about a cash advance for a paycheck, or with a title loan for a short-term time for a vehicle or something more like that. To be honest, I don't think staff even thought about the tax situation. If that's a concern, then we could see about adding that to the proposed definition, but it hadn't been discussed. I don't think it was discussed at the zoning committee either. And that could be considered an advanced rather than a loan to an accessory, as an accessory use to a primary business that would not fit the definition. You could look at it in that way.
Mr. Cox, as you look at the draft definition, does it appear to cover the practice of tax preparers who make instant, quote, refunds, end of quote?
The missing element, I think, that would distinguish the tax preparers from the proposed definition is that there isn't, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I don't see that the tax preparer would hold an instrument as essentially as collateral for a loan. In this case, it's the, I think it is more akin to an advance, as other staff have pointed out.
Other comments or questions? Go ahead.
Well, I'm looking at the 2 maps. I'm looking at the map of existing establishments, and I'm looking at the map of proposed zoning districts. Am I correct that if we were to approve the proposed zoning districts, all of the existing establishments would be non-conforming?
That is correct. The
Thank you.
proposed area is looking at only the C2 zoning district.
Can I follow that up?
Go ahead.
And their remedy would be?
Go to Skokie.
They would be considered legal non-conforming and would be grandfathered in
I'm grandfathered.
as
Okay.
existing.
Thank you.
We don't have amortization, so
Okay.
subject to restrictions on expansion and so on.
Excuse me, but then I presume that if one of those businesses ceased to exist on that property, then another business would not be, of a similar type, would not be allowed unless they achieved a special use to relocate there?
They would be allowed to change ownership and continue in the same location, but if they ceased to exist for a certain period of time, then they could not come back to that location.
It appears that we're certainly not encouraging this business. Would we be more consistent if we acted the same way we did with pawn shops and requested that it be taken out of the zoning ordinance by definition and save some paperwork?
It raises a series of constitutional issues, potentially, to completely ban a use.
Well, you're not, excuse me, maybe I said it wrong. Not banning it, but just taking the definition out of the zoning ordinance. Same as we did with pawn shops.
Well, if we go without a definition, they might fit another definition. It would not be clear that they are being regulated. And I think the attempt is to regulate it. I run into this advising other cities when I explain that if they want to regulate adult uses, they need a definition of adult uses. And they don't like the definition of adult uses. And if they can't define it, it's very hard to have a regulation that whose application is so unclear.
No, I can't argue that, but how is this different than what we did with pawn shops? Because that's really what I was asking.
Currently, there is no zoning definition for these types of establishments that specifies them alone. So zoning considers them to be, I can't think of the wording, consumer loan, thank you, financial services establishments, same as any common bank or credit union. So they would fall back into that category where they have a very widespread range of where they can locate.
Okay, so we're trying to make a distinction. And in that case, we do have to define them.
Yeah.
Back off. Okay.
Is there,
What's the motion you want, Chairman?
is there a motion to approve, or to recommend the approval of the proposed ordinance in the packet, changes to 618.3 and 610.43?
So move.
Is there any public comment?
Is there a second?
Oh, is there a second?
Payday loan.
Second.
Is there any public comment, this being a public hearing? Hearing no public comment, is there any further discussion from the board?
Well, I do have a question, and I think it appears that existing payday loan facilities will be grandfathered in. And, if those sort of institutions don't reflect our values, then is it not in our interest to make it cumbersome for the ownership to be transferred so easily? I think, from what I understood from you, there'll be a break if there is, let's say, 4 years or whatever. If there is a long break, then they have to basically come back and apply. However, if I, as an owner, just transfer ownership to David, then basically the same payday loan. But what are we trying to do? I thought we were trying to basically...
That would require essentially a reanalysis of our legal nonconforming standards, which are housed in an entirely separate chapter of the zoning ordinance. I should also point out that the legal nonconforming regulations apply not only to uses but also structures. So while I understand your point and your concern, I think that issue isn't really squarely before the commission tonight.
Go ahead.
I think I'm a little out of sync. What is it that the ordinance, the draft ordinance, says about payday loan establishments? I can't seem to. Personally, I'm against payday loan establishments. I think they're predatory, and we shouldn't allow them, period. But we have 6 or 7 existing payday loan stores, is that correct?
There's currently 3, and there's one that's going through the permitting process right now. Staff is looking at it from a planning and zoning perspective. These types of establishments often pick older, dilapidated buildings that are prime areas for redevelopment, so they are prohibiting the possibility of a new, larger development that can help out the surrounding neighborhood.
Frankly, I don't care what it is, what impediment is thrown in their way, but I'm in favor of anything that will deter entrepreneurs from opening payday loan stores. And I know that for bed and breakfast, for example, we have special use that is limited to the individual present owner. Is that correct?
That's part of the proposed draft text, which has yet to be fully reviewed by the commission before going to council.
Okay, so I would like to see that included at a minimum, but what does the draft proposal say about payday loan establishments?
It essentially distinguishes them from financial services establishments in general.
Okay.
And then restricts them to only being special uses within only C2 commercial districts, which, based upon one of the maps provided, is a very small area within the city.
The period of time to answer your question is 1 year of disuse or abandonment. And our ordinance specifies that intent to abandon is not required. If it's not there for a year, it lapses. The change in regulations limits where they can be located much more than now. And it has distancing requirements. And they now would become special uses so that the zoning board would have to look at the special use requirements.
What's the distance requirement that
It's
is
1,000 feet.
Okay.
As I recall, 1,000 feet.
Well, I personally would oppose anything that lets them put one more payday loan store in this city.
I would argue against, Mr. Cox and I have a continuing argument about tying special uses to ownership. And the rationale for doing that is more obvious to me in the case of bed and breakfasts, where we can think of a rationale for it, and much harder here. And I guess I'm comfortable with the ordinance, the draft ordinance being defensible. And I think if we said no more, 0, under any conditions, I think it would be harder to defend should some commercial entity want to challenge it.
Yeah, but at least it would deter, because there's a further process that you have to go through to establish. And if it becomes an encumbrance, then people will generally shy away from that. I think it's for something that I think, even if you look at this panel, it really does not reflect the value of anybody on this panel. There seems to be another one in the pipeline.
That's why we need to decide this tonight. Yeah. You have to come forward and speak loudly into the microphone and tell us who you are, because we would not otherwise know.
My name is Jessica Feldman, and I live at 525 Grove, and I have a question. I wasn't going to say anything, but where are the areas that they can go now? Exactly where are those commercial areas where you're going to let them go in? And then I may have something to say.
I make my living, or I used to make my living, doing mostly land use litigation, and I therefore would always encourage it everywhere,
For all the reds.
but not really for Evanston. And maybe it needs to be revisited, but I would like to see this passed tonight
Where are the current?
so that
Where are the current?
it can go to P&D before the permitting process is over, or the additional one. The lawyers would say something incomprehensible, time is of the essence, and the philosophers would scratch their heads. Go
Can I
ahead.
just make one comment? From where they are now to where you're going to allow them, there are a lot more places where they could go in.
Now they can go in many zones.
There are now 4 places, and now if you
No,
look
there are,
at where
there are 4 existing ones, but without the change, they can go all over the commercial areas, all over the city.
but now they can only go in C2, which is also kind of all over the city. I mean, it goes straight down. If,
I'll ask staff to show you on the map.
this is
That's where they currently are allowed as a lending and financial.
not changing much.
You have all of downtown.
They can go downtown.
Right, they can go.
So now you're just keeping them on whatever this is, on Green Bay Road. On Green Bay Road and Dempster. Well, okay. I'll be quiet.
So in other words, in your opinion, this is the most creative and restrictive document that we can come up with that does not incur potential negative legal effects down the road.
I don't know if I could give an opinion that strong, but my opinion would be this is what's before us tonight, and then it can be revisited. Would you agree?
I have no opinion to give,
I
but
mean,
I will vote on
that's
this
what's
matter.
before us tonight,
It is what's before us tonight, I'll agree with that.
and I don't think we could recraft it easily tonight. Gentlemen, is there, have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. I vote aye. Is there any informal recommendation to staff to look at this further in the future?
I would recommend that we put these solar fields right in downtown Evanston. I mean, right in B1 and B2.
You
I don't
want to
think-
allow them in B1 and B2?
Yeah, because if I look at it, the restrictive areas where these may possibly, where they may be destined to go, I think there are still not that far from residential areas, and I find these sort of establishment appalling. I think it does not reflect our values as a city. So I think my problem is that this is not restrictive enough, and I think if we are even going to tempt and give people the opportunity to open additional payday loan facilities here, then let's put it in our best feature. Let's put it where people see it most. Let's put it in downtown, where everybody can see and see how proud we are of this. I mean,
Let me just
B1 and B2.
say to staff, you have a sense of the council, I mean, of the committee, the commission, feeling that more restrictive is better. I know they would agree that constitutional is important. So when you should have a lot of extra time to review this, we would appreciate your looking at it. The next, I think that concludes this item on the agenda. We still have enough people that we are still in session,
Well,
but dwindling fast.
Commissioner Peters, could I do a little housekeeping? Could we approve
Yes.
the minutes
Yes.
from the
Is there
last
a
two
motion
meetings?
with respect to the minutes of February 8th?
so moved. Approval.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Is there a motion with respect to the minutes of February 15th? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any other housekeeping? The house is kept. That brings us to I think home occupations, but we may have some people here for bed and breakfast.
Could we move the agenda to B&B as the next item of discussion?
Next item of discussion is B&B. I know we have some people with that want to address this, and we have some commissioners that are running out of time, but let's at least hear from the people who are here. So we are going to commence the hearing on zoning text amendment 11, PLND 0026, consideration to amend portions of the bed and breakfast portion of the zoning ordinance. And we have some draft material on that also, somewhere. Too many pieces of paper. Okay, where is it hiding?
Sorry, it's getting late. Probably halfway through your packet, is that right? There's a memo, March 9th, from city staff with an attached proposed zoning ordinance, 647 bed and breakfast establishments. This is reflective of all of the proposed changes from the last Plan Commission meeting discussing this. I also provided a link for historical information for everybody to be caught up on that as well. So if there are any questions pertaining to the proposed amendments, or we would entertain comment as well.
Is there anyone, member of the public or alderman present, who wanted to address this? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Judy Fisk, First Ward Alderman, City of Evanston. Alderman Nguyen and I want to thank the Commission for their attention to this matter. We think it's very important. We would ask that you consider a distance requirement between uses of 900 feet. And other than that, we're happy with the amendments that you're considering. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that?
My name is David Reynolds. I live at 204 Davis Street. And I'd like to ask you this evening to reconsider one of the recommendations and to improve upon another. The one I'd like you to reconsider is the minimum distance between B&Bs. Read something my wife wrote. Without distance requirements, areas where B&Bs are likely to congregate, like the Lakeshore Historic District with large homes in Evanston's lakefront, could be substantially changed, as have waterfronts and neighborhoods elsewhere. Whether slow or fast, the erosion as commercial ventures replace family homes changes the character of a neighborhood and would change the character of our lakefront. Taking the long view is often necessary to preserve what is worthwhile and all too easily lost. I would like to add that I'm pleasantly surprised that you put in a distance requirement for payday loan stores, and that doesn't appear to be something that is anathema to the city. The only present defense against the congregation of B&Bs in any area is the cumulative special use provision of the zoning ordinance, which is a very subjective standard. It means that people are going to have to argue, the public and the person who wants the B&B are going to argue before you about whether or not there are too many uses or these uses are too close together. It seems to me that a distance provision, as you have for payday loan stores and as the city has for group homes, would be appropriate for B&Bs to prevent their clotting in any one area. This has become particularly important as we've learned that Mr. Pritzker has bought a fourth home on the same block. He's bought the home that he previously said he was also going to turn into a B&B. We don't know that he's going to apply for that, but owning 4 homes on the end of one block and wanting to be in the B&B business concerns me as a resident of that neighborhood. The portion of the proposed ordinance that I'd like you to improve is the one on ownership, Section K. I would like to see the Plan Commission come up with some sort of a means of determining who the owners of an LLC are. As it's a blind entity, it could change from time to time and could circumvent the requirement that a more than 50% owner be the owner-occupier of a B&B. I don't know what the legality of it would be, but I would suggest that every year with the annual licensing that you require the ownership to be divulged. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ford, did you have some proposed language with respect to Part K?
Well, if we're going to act on this tonight, then yes, I would suggest some clarifying language for paragraph K. But I'd be glad to hold that if we're not going to act on it tonight.
Can we get your clarifying language?
Sure.
And then
Okay.
I will ask the board for their
all right.
preferences on
What troubled me about K is this wording, the owners of any bed and breakfast establishment. Presumably, if the owner, occupant, operator is a 51% owner, under this language, the 49% owners would also have to live there. I'm comfortable with the substance here. I don't want to change the meaning of this, but I would suggest that it be reworded to read, any bed and breakfast establishment shall be operated by an owner, operator, occupant who shall reside therein. Said owner, occupant, operator, occupant shall, and then subparagraphs 1 and 2 are okay. I think that gets us around the problem of the non-resident owners. Any bed and breakfast establishment shall be operated by an owner, operator, occupant who shall reside therein. Said owner, operator, occupant shall have legal or beneficial interest, et cetera, et cetera. It looks clear. It looks clearer to me, which
I think that eliminates an ambiguity. Let me ask staff how the portion referring to the beneficial ownership of an LLC or corporate entity would be enforced?
Sorry, could you please repeat your question?
The question was raised, how would the city know about a change in the ownership of an LLC or corporation? And that's a good question. How would that section be enforced? Would we be requiring regular reporting of changes, and so on and so forth? And should that be in the ordinance?
The one thing I would point out, just as a prefatory comment, is that generally in the operation of any use, we aren't necessarily aware of the day-to-day ownership interests. And so therefore, there can be times where ownership changes hands or percentages and the city is not wholly aware. The issue becomes what happens once we are aware, and what our responses and our options that are available to us. If the city were to become aware that the owner, operator, occupant doesn't satisfy one of these conditions, the special use holder would at that point not be in compliance with the zoning ordinance and would then be subject to revocation procedures pursuant to the ordinance. As far as determining and obtaining that information, any B&B special use holder who wishes to actually operate a B&B also has to get a license from the health department, which is subject to annual review actually by the Human Services Committee of the City Council. So they aren't included in the text here before you, but if and when an ordinance based upon your recommendations goes before P&D and the entire City Council, I was intending to include concomitant amendments to Title 8, which is the health provisions of the City Code, that make the definitions therein conform to the amended definitions that are in here. We could include in there as well an ownership statement as part of their annual license application, which we actually currently do for apartments. We have an annual apartment registration ordinance that requires a variety of information, including owner, local, if the owner is not local, a local agent who is in charge of managing the property, et cetera.
Would this be similar to the way liquor licenses are handled?
To some extent, yes. Liquor licenses are such a different animal than many other types of licenses the city holds out. I hesitate to draw the comparison, but it would be more like a liquor license than perhaps other special use permits that we hand out, given the fact that there is the annual health license.
Does the commission have any comments with respect to the proposed change of language from Mr. Ford? Oh, what the heck, from Jim?
I think it's clearer, and I would certainly be in favor of it.
Alderman?
Could I just suggest language that of primary residence rather than shall reside in?
I'm just thinking of the wordsmithing to make it fit.
If I may, and forgive me, Commissioner Ford, if I have your language a bit wrong here, but I think it would read, any bed and breakfast establishment shall be operated by an owner, operator who shall reside therein, shall reside in the subject property as his or her primary residence, or something to that effect.
Something to that effect.
Not to complicate matters any further, the one consideration that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is that, given the idea of primary residence, is that it's not outside the realm of possibility that a bed and breakfast may not operate year-round. And actually, at one point, the zoning committee of the Planning Commission was considering restrictions on the number of days in a year in which it might operate. If the owner of the B&B, doesn't reside in the B&B as a primary residence, so let's say, winters elsewhere or some such, under the circumstances, that person would not be in residence and therefore could not lawfully operate the B&B while they're, staying in Florida. So so I'm just raising an issue for you to consider before passing this along to council.
That is a problem with primary residence instead of reside therein.
Wait a minute, what?
Well, that's covered by operate. If they're not there, they're not operating it.
That's my point. That if they are not in residence, they are not
Operating.
they're neither occupying nor operating the use at that time.
No, I think it's
So if you did not include the primary residence language, you would allow for a person who has a primary residence, let's say in a southern state that doesn't have personal income tax, to still own one of these uses and have it here, but they could not, lawfully operate unless they were actually staying in the house at that time. The issue then becomes whether or not we think it's too difficult to try and ascertain who is in residence at what time and who's operating, or just adopt the primary residence definition, which then again can be addressed in the annual licensing as to primary residence. That can be part of the information that the applicant would provide.
so it sounds like primary residence and licensing would work to accomplish what the subcommittee wanted and Alderman wanted. That brings us to the distancing requirement. There's been a member of the public and a member of the public who is also an alderman, Alderman Fisk, have suggested we need a distancing requirement rather than to rely on the cumulative impact standard in the special use standards. Go ahead.
I sometimes think when we're discussing B&Bs that we have to recognize that it's not one size fits all. And I think this is what bothers me about the discussion. And let me give an example that started off. Stu Updike mentioned that he thought the concern about specifying one parking space per bedroom was onerous. I think that's the word you used. And you live in an area where parking is so tight that it probably is warranted in that area. And I'm just wondering if those two issues, parking and distance, isn't something that really should go through the special process vetting rather than try and make one size fit all. As far as distance, I could see where there is a concern up on the lakefront of having too many ganged together. But in an area closer to perhaps, I think Seth brought it up, if he had a house on Wesley, it wouldn't be an issue having another one on Asbury, which is just across the alley, because they're totally two different neighborhoods. So I just want to throw that out, that I don't think we have to get out of this mindset of one size fits all. Okay?
Gentleman and lady?
Well, I'll stick with what I said last time, which was that I believe that when people come before us seeking special uses, yes, it. Sorry, I can't hear. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, I didn't really have one. Oops.
For the zoning board.
Oops. Sorry. That what basically, to repeat what I said last time, that I was not in favor of a distance requirement for a couple of reasons. One being that if one person beats everyone else to it, that means no one else who might otherwise have considered having one, not to clump them, but just because it was something that they really had their heart set on, won't be able to do it unless they move to another place. So it precludes people from doing it simply because they're too close to another one, simply because of that. Whereas if we go through the special use process, they can come in and make the case that wherever the second one, the third one, whatever goes, doesn't have a negative cumulative effect. And for us to say, well, we shouldn't do that because that brings up all sorts of acrimony in the neighborhood, doesn't satisfy me. I'd rather take each case by case and determine whether the next one has a negative cumulative effect or not. Whether it's because Asbury is a totally separate neighborhood in look and feel from Wesley, or for whatever reason. Let's hear what the neighbors have to say. Maybe the neighbors have no problem with it, but I really would leave it to a case-by-case basis with regard to distance.
Do you think maybe the lakefront is a special situation?
I think people would be more likely to turn out to oppose a second one if it were on the lakefront because of the concern for the clumping. And I think their voices would be heard.
I'm inclined to agree with the cumulative effect, and given that there are so many different neighborhoods, I feel that a dimensional restriction would be too restrictive. And I'm trusting in the integrity of the reviewing body to determine when a cumulative effect is reached, as well as the testimony of Evanston residents, which there seems to be no lack of, should also serve to inform that decision.
Mr. Ford?
Without repeating any of these arguments, I agree. I'm particularly compelled, I guess, by this idea of the difference between uses that are across the street from each other and uses that are across the alley from each other. Those strike me as different sorts of situations.
So there are two more silent commissioners.
I think we're waiting for you to make your motion.
I'm just, we could entertain a motion with respect to the distancing requirement, and then we'll do a motion with respect to ownership. Is there a motion with respect to distancing requirements? And whether that should be changed?
Would move that we keep it as is, not make any changes.
Is there a second?
Do we have to vote that?
It would be.
If you want to vote it, then I'll second it.
It would be, the record.
It would be clear.
The record would be clear, which is transmitted to P&D.
Second.
Is there any further discussion, or is it all finished? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm fine. Let's do.
I think I've said pretty much all I have to say on the subject. You know, if I had a vote, I wouldn't change. I wouldn't change it
All those in
from the way
favor
it is
of the
now.
motion not to change the draft? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Is there a motion with respect to a change in the ownership provision?
Could we have the language read to us as it's been redrafted, please?
The language may get cleaned up a little bit in final draft ordinance form, but it'd be something to the effect of any B&B establishment shall be operated by an owner occupant, by an owner who shall reside therein shall reside in the subject property, which shall also be his/her primary residence, something to that effect. I'll make it sound better when I write it. And then the rest of K, so K1 and 2, would remain the same. And then also, it's not squarely before you since it's in Title 8, not rather than Title 6 of the ordinance, but I would include, well, I guess that might be the subject of a separate motion, but there's also discussion of the ownership information as far as the application for the health license.
We'll make that reference outside of this consideration. Is there, go ahead.
I have a question about that. I do have quite a few friends who have properties in Michigan, for example, and they declare them as their primary residence. And Michigan doesn't require that you live there 6 months out of the year. All you have to do is declare it as your primary residence to take advantage of the fact that there is about a 50% homeowners exemption in that state. So I have a number of friends who declare the Michigan property where they may spend 3 or 4 weeks during the course of a year as their primary residence. Now that would preclude someone who spends 11 and a half months in Chicago or in Evanston from running a bed and breakfast. Is that your understanding?
I think it would be difficult to justify declaring 2 inconsistent primary residences. And
I'd agree. I agree with that.
And I do know people who declare their primary residence in Michigan, and it just isn't. But they make that declaration. None of the members of this commission, of course.
Just as an alternative, if a sufficient number of the commissioners are so concerned, rather than saying primary residence, which is essentially invoking by reference a tax declaration, you could instead have specific language stating that the owner operator shall reside within the subject property for, more than 6 months out, more than 180 days out of the year or some such.
That would satisfy my concern. Some time requirement that you must live on the premises during the course of a given year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that addresses our concern, the fundamentals of the concern, as I recall, and that the owner is present at the site and answerable to its occupants and the city if any events occur.
Actually, I think we're getting into too much minutia. I think if someone wants to open a bed and breakfast, they have to make a choice whether Evanston's their primary residence or some other place is their primary residence. If we start saying 180 days in a year without going on further to say, and by the way, you can only have your bed and breakfast open when you're there, I mean, it just gets to be painstakingly minute and unenforceable. I'm really in favor of just simply referring to the primary residence. And if it's not, it's not.
I guess I would
Make your choice.
Agree with that. I think that's the intent, is that the operator, this is their home. And primary residence, I think, really is a way of talking about home. 180 days, different concept for me.
Do we have to define primary residence?
I don't think so.
Would it be any clearer if we stated that the owner-operator must be in residence any time he is operating as a B&B?
I think it's already there.
You got it.
Mr. Ford?
Mr. Moderator, I'm perilously close to moving that we continue this to the next meeting.
Oh, we have a motion on the floor.
I don't think you do. I don't think anybody moved the ownership provision yet.
Maybe I'm wrong. Is there a motion? Does anyone wish to make a motion tonight and vote on it?
I'll make a motion. Sorry. I'll make a motion that we revise the language along the lines of what council has suggested, including the reference to primary residence.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, quick question. I agree with what Ken was saying earlier in terms of actually linking it to, I think, okay, this is how I understand this. The whole effort is to make it impossible for individuals to buy this, claiming to actually be residents of that place while running bed and breakfast, if I understand you, right? And then from Stu and Scott, what I'm finding out is there are people declaring that their primary residences are elsewhere while they actually reside somewhere. So we know that there's a strong possibility that this may also happen if somebody's ambitious enough. You know, I think it's too open if we go the route that we're going. I think it's too open, and we can't meet your need.
But Ken suggests that, and I think it's a sense of the commission, that there be a second amendment which would require people to make a declaration annually in connection with the health license. And so there would be, yes, people will act fraudulently, but I think a declaration in connection with the health license would go a long way to reduce the fraud. And someday Michigan will look behind those declarations too. And I think that would be, that's sort of implicit in what we're doing, is that we then say, staff, take a look at this. Is that?
I'm comfortable with the motion, given that that additional item is with relation to the health.
The annual health.
Yeah, is also included.
So I'm urging staff to make note. And any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I vote aye. That brings us to the zoning text amendment regarding home occupations.
Mr. Chair.
We need to make a motion on the entire proposed.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but I have a concern about the parking. As I said, I think that one size will not fit all. I think that should go through special use also.
Gentlemen and lady, do you wish to take that up tonight, or shall we continue this?
Move to continue.
And it would need to be continued either to our next regularly scheduled meeting or to a special meeting. Is there anyone that can come to a special meeting next week on Wednesday?
Yes.
Yes?
Possibly.
Not, you're not in hospital
Possibly.
with sickness?
Yes, if I don't get worse.
Yes.
I can also do it, and maybe some of the others could come. Motion, could we hear a motion to continue this for hearing a week from today, that's April, no, that's March 21st. And if a quorum cannot be found, then to the next regularly scheduled meeting. Cox? At 7 p.m. in City Hall, wherever they'll have us. For this. Is that? Someone want to make that motion?
No, I'll make the motion because we normally have our zoning subcommittee at that time. If we don't have an agenda, then whoever is on this committee that was there may
Zoning Board
very well
of
have blocked it
the
out.
Zoning Committee of the Plan Commission has been canceled for March because of lack of agenda items.
Okay, then.
So that it is open.
Then there's a good chance that those of us that sat on it would show up and have that Wednesday cleared. Okay. So I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
With respect to, we're now commencing the hearing on home occupations.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a motion to, well, we have to continue it to a date certain, and then we can adjourn, because otherwise we have to renotice it. Is there a motion to continue that? To either a week from today, or if there is no quorum, our next regularly scheduled meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. I think that concludes our business. It's too late to know for sure. Motion to adjourn is unanimous. I can tell.